Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hi there. Yes, it is me again, your intrepid host, in the words of the mellifluous race Hobbs, Peter Robbins, and this is Meanwhile Here on Earth. We have kind of a different show for you tonight. We usually deal with the overtly paranormal and UFO-related subjects, and we are going to leave them alone this week. If you are listening or watching, of course, you're doing it on KGRA, DB for digitalbroadcasting.com. If you subscribe to KGRA using my name, PETER, as your subscription code, you will get a full 30% off, whether or not you're subscribing by the month or by the year. So keep that in mind. No monologue today, except to say it is a beautiful day in central New York State. 70s in the afternoon, 50s at night, the kind of weather that many of my friends in warmer parts of the states and abroad would kill for, or at least commit a felony. So, for the last 40 years, Scott Alan Roberts has built a reputation in the advertising and publishing worlds as an illustrator, art direction designer, and photographer. He is deeply engaged in the art of wordsmithery and is author of several fictional and non-fictional books. While he started his career in Bible college and theology seminary, he left the ministerial world to become a renegade theologian, stand-up philosopher, and a rapscallion historian. You've never heard those descriptions of anybody before in your life, with a hardcore devotion to exploration and adventure. Scotty is the former editor-in-chief of television's Ghost Hunters, TAP's Paranormal Magazine, publisher and editor of Intrepid Magazine, founder of the Paranormal Symposiums, which I've had the pleasure of speaking at, and for the last 12 years has been host of the Intrepid radio program. Scotty is a public speaker, writer, book illustrator, Egyptologist, and husband to his awesome wife, Rainey. And along with Rainey, he is the author of 6 utterly amazing children. And that's a fact. Scotty and his family live just across the St. Croix, or is it Croix, River from the outskirts of Wisconsin. And he is author of The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, The Secret History of the Reptilians, The Exodus Reality, The Sword and Clay, How to Be an Archaeologist, and other titles. His TV appearances have included Ancient Aliens, The Curse of the Bermuda Triangle, and History's Greatest Mysteries, among other programs. And it is a pleasure to welcome you to the show, Scotty Roberts.
Hey, Peter, thanks for having me. Wow, that was a long bio. I sat back and went, oh, I'm too verbose.
Did I do all that? Yes, you did. We've had longer, but it's, I think one of the greatest things of social networking is that you can actually keep in contact and maintain friendships that with people that you see very rarely. And you and I are a pretty good example of that, I think.
The last time you and I saw each other face to face was the Paradigm Symposium up here in Minneapolis area in 2016. So face to face,
was that
6
long?
years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And we had a great time. I'll tell you.
We did.
Also, I have never spoken at a conference with it was a Masonic hall as a venue, correct?
Yes.
And what a Masonic hall it was.
It's a gorgeous Masonic hall.
Totally. I felt that I had been transported back in time and that Knights Templar were in the audience.
Yes, they probably were.
Let's begin at the beginning, Scotty.
All right.
Did I pronounce that? What is it, St. Croix or St. Croix River?
The St. Croix River, they call it up here. So that divides Minnesota and Wisconsin. So we're about 12 miles or so into Wisconsin from the Minnesota border, putting us we're within an hour's reach of Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Is this the area where you were born?
No, I was born in Cincinnati, but I don't remember any of it. When I was a very young child, my mother divorced, moved to Minneapolis where her parents were. So I grew up in Minneapolis my whole life. So
very cool. And as a child, brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have an older brother who is about a year and a half older, who were it not for the fact that our screen door opened out, I would probably be dead today.
Fill us in on that one.
I say that in jest. You know, older brothers, younger brothers. I'd smart off. He was stronger. I was good with words. He was good with fists. That's how I grew up with him. And I've got a younger sister who's about 5 years younger. Different father. He was Ukrainian. He just passed away a few years ago. But so he was my stepdad for a few years. And so my sister was very deep into all the Ukrainian issues right now, as you might imagine. And and a single mom. I had a single mom who was, she was divorced from my father very young, then remarried to my sister's father, divorced when I was 6. And from the time I was 6 until I was 14 or 15, she was a single mom. Just imagine a single mom of 26 arbitrarily comes to mind, but she's only 18 years older than I am. And so when she was 26, she had 3 kids at home and was working as a waitress. And I think the only reason we did not live in poverty was because my grandfather made pretty good money, and he made sure she had a house of her own, and we lived on a little corner lot in North Minneapolis, and grew up. I call that house my house on Pooh Corner, if you know the reference, and from the old song. And so it was a good place to live, a good place to grow up. And she was a single mom with her own struggles and so on, but she did it. And she's just turning 80 this summer, as a matter of fact.
Bravo. Is she still living nearby, or you see her regularly?
No, she pulled up stakes. She had of all things, she had a karaoke business here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and she ran 7 shows of her own a night. She'd hire other people to do them. She was doing very well. She pulled up stakes and moved to Yuma, Arizona, about the time, not long after my wife and I met, about 16 years ago. She left, and so she's been down there ever since, and at age 80, still running her business. She makes 80 is the new 60 with her. So
way to go.
Yeah,
a role model for us all as we move forward into time.
Definitely.
Steady journey into enemy territory.
Ain't that the truth?
As a boy, what were the things that captivated your imagination most?
Oh boy. Science fiction, and horror movies. And by horror, I don't mean the way they're defined today. They weren't slasher movies. They were the old, we would stay up late on Friday nights and Saturday nights. My friends would come over. We all had paper routes, and we had to get up like on Sunday morning at 3:00 and head to the paper shack to gather all our Sunday papers.
Yep.
And so we'd stay up Saturday night, especially was Horror Incorporated.
Yay.
It came on at midnight. And it was always the old Wolfman movies and the Black Lagoon and stuff like that. Black and white film, horror noir, you could call it.
Well, kindred spirits in that.
There you go. And so I grew up with that, and I grew up with Star Trek. I would say Captain Kirk was the single most important hero in my life when I was growing up. so much so I wrote an article about that several years ago, and I updated it in recent years. It was I saw him as he was a surrogate father figure in pop culture.
Yes.
I didn't have a dad in the home. My mom was married a few times, but never knew my father, until I was in my 30s, and didn't have a father in the home that was permanent.
Yeah.
Lots of boyfriends in and out and stuff. And I don't. Let me put one caveat in here. I don't cast any aspersions at my mom or blame her. She was a single, young, beautiful woman with 3 kids, and she did it. And she, that doesn't mean, she was puritanical or anything like that. She had her boyfriends and her times like that. And I don't blame her for any of that at all. It was beautiful. A wonderful, like oil painting, a layered upbringing, just layer upon layer upon layer of different experiences and things like that. So,
Scotty, by the time that you had mastered reading, what were the books that you were drawn to? Obviously, science fiction, but any other kinds of books? I know, like me, you are a passionate amateur historian.
Yes.
But was there an area of time, of history, of the romantic past, or so it seems to us now, that captivated your imagination and your reading time by the time that you had really gotten into reading books beyond, children's books?
Funny as it may seem, for being a writer and an author, I hated reading when I was a kid. I could read comic books. Those were fun. It wasn't that I needed the pictures as a guide. It was that I was bored. Reading bored me. And, but I do remember a few books. Very young, kindergarten, first grade, I loved Maurice Sendak Where the Wild Things Are. Now, that's not a novel or anything like that, but I loved that book. And
it was a brilliant book.
Yes. Checked it out all the time.
I'll jump in for a moment because I remember the impact as a young art student that his work had on me, and a book I found incredibly moving, incredibly sophisticated, and ahead of its time, Higgledy Piggledy Pop.
Yes.
Which was a book about dealing with death in the big picture, but through a lost pet. And with the Sendak illustrations at their best. He was one of my illustration and children's book heroes, and looking at it from a point when I was considering being a children's book illustrator. So at a certain point, though, something
there was a click over,
grabbed your imagination regarding this culture and this time so far in the past, namely ancient Egypt. Was your introduction to that through films?
Mildly through films. One in particular. Can I jump back to your previous point just for a second?
Please.
As I got a little older, now I do a lot of illustration of books, children's books and adult books, and not adult triple X, adult as in parent, mature audience readers. And Mercer Mayer's books I used to love. He's the one who does the little critters books, and then his child has taken over. But he had all of his East of the Sun, West of the Moon, Beauty and the Beast. Some of these books that he illustrated, lushly illustrated in pen and ink and watercolor. And that was a style I emulated. And as I got a little older, I think I can earmark the 9th grade. There are 2 books that I read in particular that have stuck with me ever since. And one of them I would put very high on my list. And I recently read it chapter by chapter to my children at bedtime. And that's To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh my gosh.
And that book made a huge impact on me as a 13 or so year old 9th grader.
Me too.
And the other one now, why is it just slipping my mind? I had 2 of them. I was talking to somebody. It doesn't matter. That was the one that primarily had that big impact on me.
Yeah.
As I got a little older, you talk about history and what I loved the old movies. I was a big Errol Flynn fan. Back in, when I was 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, I was watching the old Errol Flynn movies.
You and me both.
On TV, and I loved the swash and the buckle. You can tell by some of this stuff, I loved that sort of thing. And I read a little later, some of Forster's books, Horatio Hornblower.
Oh, boy. Yep.
Books like that, and loved those.
Terrific.
But the first real blush I had with Egyptology was I was in our family wasn't churched, so I kind of sought things out a little bit on my own. I knew that there was some gap that was missing that I couldn't define it that way as a 10 or 11-year-old kid, but there was something more I wanted to know. And I ended up in a very conservative fundamentalist Baptist church because there was an old gentleman I met that became a mentor for me from 11 to 15 years old. And he was out knocking on doors, picking up kids for Sunday school with a bus. And he invited me to church. I went to church. I started going. In the Sunday school class I was in, now this was one of those big, what they call the big fortress church, huge church, 1,500 members, right in the inner city of Minneapolis. They had the Christian school from kindergarten to 12. They had the seminary there. They had the radio station. They owned a college campus down in southern Minnesota. This is the church I was involved in. And the Sunday school teacher, when I was in 7th grade, had said, he gave us all assignments, all us boys, 5 or 6 boys in the class, to take this little topic I'm going to give you and write 100 words about it for next Sunday. And he gave me serendipitously, or fate, whatever you would call it, the Scotty, I want you to write on the Pharaoh of the Exodus.
Wow.
Okay. What's an Exodus? What's a Pharaoh? I didn't know what any of these things were. And he said, you know who can help you out? Give Chucky Ailing a call. He was a member of our church. And he said, he can help you out with this. Well, as it turns out, Chucky Ailing, when I was 11 years old, he was known as Chucky Ailing. Now he was the president of the seminary, Dr. Charles Ailing, that I went to. He was the chair of history at the University of Northwestern for 20 years. He went on to become the president of the Near Middle East Archaeological Society. He's an archaeologist. He's an Egyptologist. As I said, he was the president of the seminary I attended later. He recruited me, and very big into history. And so I remember on Sunday morning of the next week after I'd called him, strolling through the narthex of the church, and, all these members post-church, everybody's having coffee and shaking hands. And he said he would meet me on the bench by the drinking fountain. And there was sitting this. He was short and bald and wore horn-rimmed glasses and looked very egg-headed, as you might describe a scholar. And so I met with him, and he gave me, for about 15 minutes, the whole rundown on his theory of who the Pharaoh of the Exodus might have been. And that stuck with me. It stuck with me for many years. I wrote, when I went to seminary, I wrote papers on it. And on the educational system that Moses would have encountered in 18th dynasty Egypt, using a lot of the information he gave me rudimentarily when I was 11, I'm using now when I'm 21, 22 in seminary, going for my master's degree. I'm using that same basic information. My friend John Ward, who you have met, who is archaeologist in Egypt with his wife, he and I had our differing theories on Moses, the historical Moses, the Exodus. We wrote a book a few years ago called The Exodus Reality, in which I took this same information that Dr. Charles Ailing gave me and had it expanded on it many times over the years. And that was the whole theme of my side of that book, where John and I presented our two different points of view. Was that I believed it was Amenhotep II, son of Tutmosis I, son of Tutmosis II, son of Tutmosis I. This guy back here, that's a bust that John Ward had made for me in Egypt from a stone out of Hatshepsut's quarry. This is the man I believe was the historical Moses, Senenmut, the Grand Vizier beneath Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh. And so all of this stuff, all of that interest funnels all the way back to Dr. Charles Ailing, or Chucky Ailing, sparking in me an interest in this.
Let me jump in for a moment. You had this mentor that came into your life and was a tremendous influence from the age of about 11 to 15. Were you brought up in a particularly religious household up until that point?
No, we were very non-religious. As I said, there was no father in the home. There was a stepfather for a few years. Now, he was Ukrainian Orthodox, which basically Greek Orthodox.
Yes.
And I remember at age 5 being baptized into the Ukrainian Orthodox Church because he held that religion. As a matter of fact, until he died a few years ago in his 80s, he attended the same church, the same Ukrainian community in Minneapolis, and so on. And I just remember at age 5 I didn't know what baptism meant. I had no understanding of any of the theology, of course.
You're 5 years old.
I was 5. But I remember it was the evening. I was wearing a suit, and I was carrying a little silver box. I don't remember the what that was all about. And walking down the aisle of this church, and the iconography and the statuary, and it was dark, and there were candles lit, and it was gleaming and gold and sparkly. And I remember as I grew older, I thought, I was in the Baptist church, which was it's very non any of that stuff. And when I got older by choice, but I thought I miss, as a 5-year-old, the mystery of the sparkling, glowing, candlelit iconography and all that, and the beautiful colors of the paintings and stained glass and all that. And think of it, you can almost envision a movie scene where the lighting is set it's dark, but where it's lit, there's, light on the altar, there's candles, there's reflecting light, there's all these colors and prisms and things. And that's how it sticks in my memory. But we weren't a religious family, to say all that, to say that. That's as close as we got to being religious. Yeah. My mother's stepfather, who I always knew that was my grandpa. He married my mother's mother after World War II. He was a Jewish man that grew up in Minneapolis. And almost as Jewish as you could get. He was, by name, he was Oscar Gould. They were, Oscar Goldstein was their name, the Goldsteins. Oh, so I always grew up, there was a whole side we were the 4 goys, my mom and my brother and sister and I, the 4 goy in an ocean of Judaism in this family I grew up with. And it was, my grandfather would pick me up and we'd go visit his mother in the Shalom home in St. Paul. It was a rest home for Jewish people. And she was very elderly, crinkly elderly. And I would walk in with my grandfather at age 8 or 9 and Scotty, she'd say. And it was so now stereotypical. It was, from my lips to God's ears you have grown. And it was all that stuff. And so I grew up around that. And even my aunt, who was my mom's half sister, 10 years older than me, was all she was, but very American. She was born in Minnesota, Minneapolis, to my grandfather and his wife, my mom's mother, my mom's little sister here. And but when she got silly or angry or one of the two, she always talked, she was normal. But boy, when she got angry, it was like Oh, I took her to see in 1982. I took her to see the Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, and at the end of the movie, where Spock dies and he's put in the tube and shot out into space, and Scotty is playing the bagpipes, and she leans over to me in the theater and she goes, "Scotty, when I should die," she says, "that is how I want to go." And she didn't have an accent like this. She was born in Minneapolis. And I will say this as an final anecdote to that. She passed away in 95, rather suddenly. She was ill. And she was, what was she, in 95? I would have been 35. So she was 45, 46 years old. She passed away. And I got to manage some of what was going on with that. And I said, I've got some requirements. So you go into this little chapel. Well, it's big, actually. It's a domed chapel, South Minneapolis by Lake of the Isles, Lake Calhoun. And it echoes. It's all mosaic. And it just, the reverberation is unbelievable. And on this side of the main aisle, you've got all the friends, the goy are all over here. And over on this side, it was all the Jews. It was the whole Jewish family. And so I lined it up. And after my uncle read the eulogy, I had a bagpiper in full regalia.
Yes.
And and came into the back and started, playing Amazing Grace. And all this whole side over here, all the Jews were like, "What is that?" And so we had the bagpiper walk down the main aisle, and I got a tear in my eye when I did. I said, "Andy, that's for you." And that's
beautiful,
what
Scotty.
So, anyway.
A lot of us Jews have an attachment to Scotland that I do not understand, but I love Scotland. I love the Scots, and I now think I may revise some of my thoughts about when I am being checked out. A bagpiper might serve very well. Nothing not Jewish about that, as far as I'm concerned.
It was a very fun experience, and for a tragic death, it was ended up being fun. And
at a certain point, though, when you were younger, you were, it sounds like from even just the biographical remarks I read to folks at the beginning, that you were considering devoting your life to God.
I was. It's interesting that this is sensitive a little bit, but I've got to mention it because I wasn't planning on it, but it
please,
it's a hinge pin to that.
Yeah.
When I was very young, 5, 6. Well, it was right after my mother's divorce from my stepfather. So I was 6. And we had a male babysitter that sexually abused my brother and I when we were very young, 6 and 7 we were. And too young to know much about what to do about that.
Yeah.
1966 is the year. So that gives you an idea of the whole setting for this kind of thing when they happened. And we were placed under threat several times by him that he would tell our parents or tell my mom if we told. And that didn't make any sense, but there was a threat of some kind. So we kept quiet about it.
Of course.
And it was something that I grew up with. I never lost the memory of it, never blanked it. As far as I know, no PTS type of a reaction to it. It was just another one of those memories of things that happened. And there were some physical abuses along the way over the years. But the reason I bring that up is I saw my brother and I react to that in 2 completely different ways.
Yes.
My brother found his escape in, for lack of a better thing, machismo. He had to be the Marine. He had to learn martial arts, and he did all of this, and he went into the Marine Corps, martial arts. He's right now today at 62. He's, like at least 10 times over black belt in Taekwondo and an instructor and all of this. And every time I talk to him on the phone, he sounds just like me. by the way, but he'd talk like this. This your brother Joe, and that's the kind of, so he escaped that way. I escaped into ministry, into spirituality. I didn't see it as that at the time, but when I look back on it and recount it, I say, there was a time not long ago where I said, my brother Joe and I escaped, but we did it in two very different ways. And that's what led me into ministry. And I mentioned I met this older man. I say older man, he's a year younger than I am now. But he was an old guy that I met when I was 11. I'd been working all day with my brother in this a truck garden, a big farm where he'd hired kids for $5 for the whole day.
Wow,
like
that's not bad money.
Not bad money. In 1969, 1970, that was pretty good money. Now, I made $5, peasants. And so there I was, covered head to toe in black soil at the end of the day. And I walked down to the little cafe by our house to get burgers for my brother and I. And I'm sitting on the little round stool, it was like this soda jerk fountain. And there's an old man sitting there having coffee. And he turns to me. He's got this huge smile, just ear to ear. And he's like, man, you're dirty. He says, how'd you get so dirty? And we struck a conversation. He says, well, he says, I run a bus route and I pick up kids for Sunday school. If you'd like, I could pick you up, take you to Sunday school. I said, sure. So the next morning I did. I became a born again Christian the next morning.
Wow.
In the Baptist church. And that is what I pursued the rest of my life. And all the way up through, I went to Bible college. I went to seminary. Now, Bill was, he was a bricklayer and a fireplace builder. At 60 years old, could outrun an 11-year-old kid. I mean, he was just, and so he and I got to know each other pretty well. My mom had been looking for, the Big Brothers organization.
Sure.
She'd been looking for a big brother for me and one for my older brother. And Bill caught wind of this. I told him about it, and he went and talked to my mom. He says, would you mind if I became Scotty's big brother? And she said, that's fine with me. And it was never official through the organization, but he took me under his wing. We went camping together. He picked me up every weekend. All his kids were grown up and gone. And he taught me his trade, fireplace building and stonework and stonemasonry and all this.
Terrific.
Up until, and he passed away of cancer in about 4.5 years after I met him. And so, but he was a big stepping stone to my becoming that person that I was for many years, ministry bound, but I was also in a what I would call very legalistic, the darker side of what I believe, legalistic, if you did this list of things, you're in God's will. If you do anything on this list, you're out of God's will. You're a backslider and all those terms we know of. And so by the time I hit college, I was starting to really struggle with the politics side of what I was believing.
Yes.
By faith. And I became a youth pastor for a while I was in seminary. Then I went right from seminary into advertising, and I took a job in Detroit. I'm doing creative in advertising and working on the side full-time for no pay as a youth pastor. And I remember at those times teaching things to kids. I would ask them, this just comes to mind, and I said, we're talking about a topic when we had youth group together. And I said, let me ask you all, let's stop everything. Let me ask. I said, how many of you here are Christians? And we're in church, of course. And they're all like, we're all Christians, obviously. And I said, let me ask you. I said, why are you a Christian? What makes you a Christian? And I got various answers. I said, anyway, just start giving me popcorn answers. I was getting, well, because my family's Christian, or because of this, because of that, and all these different things. Well, because we always go to church. I said, I said, thank you for playing. All of those are wrong answers. I said, I could go stand in my garage for a week and I'd never become a car. I said, coming here doesn't make you a Christian. And so we started for 6 months. We did a whole thing on what makes you a Christian. And a lot of it flew in the face of not so much the theology, the basic systematic theology, but against practice, against experience versus position type of thing. And so I didn't lose my job or anything like that, but I saw myself developing in a different way.
Yeah.
And eventually, about 20 years ago, I would have to say I completely walked away from the church and ministry and all that, because maybe some people will look at this as a negative, but the more study and research I was doing, the more it seemed to me that what I believed was a form of what every other religion on earth believed. It was a form of making ourselves closer to God by the practice we had. And religion became a thing to me of, okay, wait a minute. Is God who God says he is? Is Jesus who Jesus said he was? Is Buddha who Buddha said he was? And I started having all these questions. And so I parted ways with it, and still haven't thrown out the baby with the bathwater, but I'm quite a long ways away from where I was in my seminary days.
At a certain point, you're in your 20s,
Yep.
and perhaps the memory of the paper and what you began to discover about the Exodus Pharaoh either played in your mind again. What happened to make you so fixed, so focused on the world of ancient Egypt and wanting more than just an interest, but to be there, to be on digs, to learn more, to become a scholar, to be an explorer? What happened to make you jump that line?
Well, it's because my first choice didn't work out. I wanted to be a starship captain, and that fell through. And I'm almost serious about that.
I hear you.
In a childlike way, it's like, well, that's what I really wanted to do. But as I grew up, I found out that's not possible. Not now, anyway. And so, what was it? I think at first it was the fact that I had a faith in something, and that faith, as I looked at the history of the Bible, that faith governed that. And it was very tight on that. And for me, I think it transcends just religion or religious faith at all. It's the knowing I can stand somewhere where something happened. When I went to Scotland, Glencoe, where the massacre of the MacDonalds took place, at Glencoe in the 1690s. And I stood in that place in those mountains. You've seen the mountain. I think it's Ben Nevis. It's the big mountain you see in the background of all these Scottish films, that mountain that comes up with the crag that comes down into the valley, and a very familiar background. And I'm standing there, and there's the brook is there, and there's nothing there. We're out in the wild, just off the bridge from the visitor's center, and you're in the wild of the Highlands. And I said, this happened here. This is like sacred ground. This is where men were killed and families were put out of their homes. And I stood there, and it's that kind of thing that I think gripped me about Egypt, with the story of Moses, the story of Egypt, and all of this was, there's some mystique here to this that goes beyond what I'm reading in Scripture. I would read the stories in Scripture, and I said, there's more to this than that. And the first time I went to Egypt, by the way, that's all it was. I'm standing where I remember we were at Menedot Habu, in Luxor, the temple. It's supposed to be the temple that was built where the
Yes.
Ogdode first rose out of the ground, the creation mound. And so I'm standing there, and you go into the Holy of Holies in Medadad Habu, and I remember I was with John, and I stood back and I looked down, and I said, look at this threshold. And it was all, concave from the thousands of years of people
Yes.
walking over it.
That's right.
And I said, look at that. I said, whoever Moses really was, my guy back there or yours, John, he walked on this lintel or this threshold. He stepped on this. The man that he would have been was here probably many times.
Yes.
And so it was that. It was taking off your shoes and sinking them into the sand in Egypt. And so what started that, I don't really know. It was that
You don't
that
have to
draw.
know.
I used to sit on the top of I put this in the introduction of my book on the Nephilim.
Yeah.
I said, when I was a kid, I spent far too many hours, my hands folded behind my head, laying atop my mother's garage as a kid, staring into the stars, thinking, there's more out there. There's something. I want to be that starship captain type of thing. And that's where I spent my time. And so it was the same thing as I got into this. Movies, of course, precipitated some of this. You'd get the visual of all things, the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston and with
I was going to say,
Yul
Brenner as the
Brenner. Yes. So it shall be written, so it shall be done. And, watching all of that pageantry on film in Technicolor. And by the way, I got one chance one time to see that in an old big theater shown on the CinemaScope. It was the Cooper Theater Cinemas. It was a round theater building, and because they had the big CinemaScope, and watched it in full Technicolor, and it was brilliantly beautiful.
In this age of screen viewing, way too many people, and sadly increasingly because of COVID, have kind of gotten out of the theater habit. But that kind of film in a theater like that, which precipitates my wanting to ask you, do you remember the impact that seeing the very first Indiana Jones film had on you?
Yes. Which I saw, I think, 19 times the year it came out. And yes, that was highly impactful. That was, like everybody else.
Storytelling, great
even
film.
Kids who didn't have an interest in archaeology wanted to be an archaeologist.
You did after that.
and so that had a big impact on me. And that was 1981 or 82 that movie came out. So I attended seminary from 80 to 82. So that came out smack in the middle of my seminary years.
Oh, boy.
And, 21, 22 years old. And I remember I had a leather jacket, and I bought one of the cheap-ass fedoras, that you get, and it had the little Indiana Jones pin on it,
I've got to cut you off for a moment to say that when that film came out, when it was still in the theaters, I had already been wearing, when the weather commanded, a leather jacket and a fedora. I had been doing it for years. And there came a time, the film was out. I'm in Midtown Manhattan, New Yorker. I'm at the corner of 57th Street and 8th Avenue at the southeast corner, and I'm about to cross to the southwest corner. School has gotten out. There are a bunch of kids just kind of riffing, and one of them takes a look at me as we're waiting for the light, and he says, "Hey, mister." What? He said, "You look like Indiana Jones." And I, black kid, and I said something I think that was particularly white, like, "Oh, well, thank you very much. I saw the film and I enjoyed it, and I've been wearing a hat like this." Yeah, they're looking at me like, whatever. The light changes.
You want to put in the caveat, I've been wearing this for years,
Absolutely. And I start to cross the street, and I stop for some reason, and I look, and they haven't crossed. They're looking at me, and they're all smiling. And one kid puts his hands to his mouth, and he goes, "Only shorter."
Nice.
I thought that was wonderful. But the film had a great impact on me, too. And I'm going to say right here, my interest in ancient Egypt began when I was about 9 years old in the New York area. we had a wonderful program called $1 Million Movie. They were really ahead of their time in a way. They showed the same damn film every day and twice on Sunday and twice on Saturday for a week. So it didn't matter when, you got to see it, but you saw it. And if you liked it, you saw it more than once. I think it was there that I first saw this film.
Oh, the Mummy. Yes.
It comes to life. I had already become a devotee of the great Boris Karloff. It was a year or two before that he became an international star, of course, with Frankenstein. And I remember, again, that kind of fun being scared. It's a very big distinction. And who doesn't like that?
Right.
Caris the Mummy and the Tana Leaves. I was interested. Also, being a Jewish kid, I knew our whole Passover thing was kind of, kind of sticking it to the Egyptians. Basically, the whole thing was about the angel of death passing over our houses because we marked them with the blood of an animal. So they knew they shouldn't kill the firstborn because we were Jewish. We were the good guys.
Right.
Now, of course, I understand that, there are Egyptian people that maybe should be spared too.
Yes.
The barbarism of organized religion to a degree. But that set me off. And with that understood, as we come into our last 10 minutes of this first section, you sent me a fascinating series of schematics. And I want to jump right into them.
Sure.
And you can describe them as we go. What are we looking at here?
All right. This is a mock-up I did. It's a photograph, and the white figure kind of left center is supposed to be where I was standing when I took a picture.
Right.
It's a different picture, but the white frame shaded out shows the picture I was taking. And I had taken that picture. This is at the Hebsed Court, which is part of it's in Saqqara, just off to the left behind that cove top temple on the left is the step pyramid of Dosher. And so we're right there at the base of the pyramid.
The first pyramid.
Yes. And I had been sitting on a stone way in the back. If you look right in the center of this photo and move just a little bit to the right, you'll see some long, skinny stones laying on their side, just off the very center of the picture, way in the background. And I was sitting there and I was having a cigarette. And John was digging around, looking at some hieroglyphs and stuff, and there was nobody there. This was in 2013, and it was right after all the stuff that Tahrir and all that in downtown Cairo, part of the Arab Spring stuff, extensions of, and so there were no tourists there. There were only Galabea-clad guardians. They were called the guardians. They're just Egyptian locals, villagers from the area that are hired to be guardians of the site for the Ministry of Antiquities.
Yes.
And they all wear the same thing. To the ground, long, loose-sleeved, white or off-white or blue galabeas, like big nighttime pajamas is almost what they look like. And so that little schematic I sent you I was showing the area of the picture I had taken in that, in that frosted white, but right back to the left of that, you see the shaded area that I shaded out, and you see a white figure and part of him is black. The black part is what I saw of something emerging from the shadows of that wall when I took that picture. Now, what's interesting, I didn't notice this figure for another 7 years.
Interesting.
But I took a picture from where you see me here. I'm like in the porch of one of these little cove top temples that you see there on the left. And then I stepped out onto the roadway there, and I took a picture in the same direction, turned around, took one this way. So now you see here, the shading I did, this dark shading to the right of center, throws it off a little bit. You got to kind of squint here, because all I was trying to show is that's a blank area that I couldn't see from my vantage point.
Yes.
So what I saw in the picture when I blew it up was what you see in the black inside the red circle. A shoulder, there it is.
Love
A
it.
shoulder, an arm, a hand, down to the waist, and it fades off. Now, what's very interesting when you see this picture a little further, this figure would have emerged from behind the stonework about 9 feet off the ground.
Oh my
which is
gosh.
very interesting. The ground level is much lower. And I didn't see it at all when I took the picture. And here you see where he's standing. That's not a very proportional picture. I just slapped that together. But I took the pictures, never saw it. I had somebody who was going to Saqqara a couple of years ago and said, hey, I had told a story of having a vision at Saqqara. And this very day I took this picture, sitting back on that stone, I had a vision, which I am not given to. I tend to be more pragmatic. I walk out of those and I scratch my butt and I go, what the hell was that?
Yeah.
But I saw the Hebsed court where I was sitting, looking back in this direction from the far end where I'd been sitting. And as I'm sitting there, just cooling my heels, it's a little bit after noon, and I lit up a cigarette, and John's poking around over there somewhere. And all of a sudden, all that whole courtyard that's filled with the rubble is all kind of lined up. And that was all clear. And it was just a pure, clean, sandy, it almost was like curbs going around the edges. And all these cove top temples were all built up on both sides. And there was no rubble. There was no ruins. Coming from the top of these, where the curve is, the archway, arced curve on the top of the temple, were like 8-9 foot long staves that came out that were torches that were lit. And I'm sitting here and the whole thing had changed. I see this clean courtyard. The temple is all built. The torches, the long shadows, as if it's like 4:30 in the afternoon on a November afternoon or something. These long shadows. And I saw walking toward me a line of priests, what I interpreted as priests. They were bare-chested, bald, the white kilt, and they're all carrying trays that are filled with little jars and things. I don't know what they were. And I can hear them chanting. I can smell incense. I feel the breeze is different. And they're marching toward me. They get about 20 feet away from where I am, and they turn over to my right and marching to the side, like they're in a ceremonial. When I say march, I'm not talking lockstep. They're moving ceremoniously and they're chanting. And although I don't remember it, I can hear it. Now, yes, you can see in the Hebsed court here, the upper image here, you see the stepped pyramid.
Yes.
To the lower left of that is the Hebsed court, and you see all the little tiny cove-topped temples or shrines that are all there. Yes. Now, the lower image shows a blow up of the Hebsed court. I had been sitting way at the far right.
Right.
I had gone all the way back to about a little past midpoint. I was standing on that little porch, and I took the picture back toward the stone. And then you can see the position of where the figure had emerged.
Gosh.
So after this vision, I had no idea what that was. And it lasted all of 2 seconds. At least by my reckoning, because I opened my eyes, tears in my eyes, not from emotion, but that chill, and your eyes tear up. And I had no idea what it was, but that's when I took the picture a few minutes later and got that figure. And there's more to this story. So,
that's extraordinary, though, Scotty.
I have David Weatherly, who you might know. He's a shaman. Course. He looked at this picture and he said, Scotty, he says, I'm going to tell you to be very careful. He says, I think you're looking at jinn there.
Whoa.
And very possibly. He said, I can't conclusively, but possibly. And he's getting a feeling off of it. Now, I've had other experiences related to whoever it was, that somebody connected with me here. And it wasn't until a year later, I had Chris Conway came with John and I over to Egypt. We led a little tour. Chris Conway was the Scottish medium in the British show Most Haunted a few years ago. He had replaced Derek Acora, who had been let go of the show. And very witty, fun man. He sat on that stone with me and he says, Scotty, I'm getting an ancient Egyptian man who says he's connected to you since this happened to you last year. And he says he won't give his name. He says until he knows he can trust you. He's connected to you. Whenever you're in Egypt, he will be connected to you.
And Scotty, I'm going to ask you at this pregnant moment to hold that thought.
You got it.
We are about to go to break. I'm hanging on your every word. I am there with you.
All right.
We are, meanwhile, here on Earth, Peter Robbins, my very special guest, Scotty Roberts. We'll be back in 4 minutes. Stay with us.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Scrolling all day, time can disappear. Wanna make it count? Why not volunteer?
Posting pics of your food, that takes up time. Time, you've got time to binge all of season 9, though it got so bad.
Time, you got time. We're gonna grow back and be the same browse you had.
Just a few hours to keep families from harm. Help us end home fires, but sound the alarm.
Volunteer for a day to install free smoke alarms in your community.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
This is Peter Robbins, and the show is Meanwhile Here on Earth, and I'm back with my guest, Scotty Roberts, and we were just discussing an extraordinary moment. As you spoke about the jinn, my mind went several places, and that's J-I-N for listeners and viewers. It was through a dear friend and a great scholar, the late, great Rosemary Ellen Guiley,
Yes.
that I first began to learn about and study something about the jinn and the tradition in the Middle East that they're rooted in. Briefly, can you give our audience an idea of who the jinn are?
Yes. The jinn are, I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of these things we don't really know anything. We're going on what we've been told and what we learn and what we root out, what people have written about them.
Yes.
There are some people who have had experiences with them, but what I've learned is that the jinn they're created beings, but they were created before the angels, before the demonic. If you put it into a Judeo-Christian or even an Islamic setting, they were made from fire. It was there, and so they're different kinds of beings. They are more akin to what you might call gods with a small g than they were anything else. They speak of, I read the work and I cannot think of his name, and this was after my experience. He was a scholar, a psychiatrist of some kind, who was also into the paranormal, but he was driving through the deserts in Egypt, south for several hours along the highway, and he had an experience meeting a jinn. And he met this jinn again at a different time. Now, people listen to that and they hear and they go, whatever. And pull this leg and it plays Jingle Bells. And yet I believed his account because I've had weird things happen to me. And I think I'm a pretty normal, pragmatic, factual kind of guy. If I can't see it, touch it, taste it, hear it, handle it, talk to it, it doesn't exist unless I know somebody and trust somebody who is credible. And that's how I felt about this guy who wrote about it. And he was had a conversation with the jinn, and he described them. And I held this, I don't know where I picked this up, maybe Rosemary Ellen's work, but he spoke about how the jinn I compare them in my mind to the fae or the fairy folk, in the sense that they could be very benevolent and loving and giving, or horridly evil, depending on the way they felt. It could have been the way what side of the bed they got up on that day. They're immortal, but they could also be killed in certain ways. And I remember this fellow, when he was interviewing, you call it an interview, he's just having a conversation with a jinn, who he said was gracious enough to speak with him. And there were certain things that he answered certain questions, and they said, okay, I'll talk to you. And he asked about God. Have you met God? And they said, well, yes, but maybe not in the sense that you would think of God. And that whole conversation came around to, well, is God the creator of the universe? They said, no, that's the originator who does that. And so I started using that term after that, the originator versus the creator versus, and they were saying, like, the God you see in religion is different from the originator, who is also different from the creator. And so they gave this complex answer to this guy, and he wasn't pushing any kind of religion or trying to foist anything on anybody. He's just telling the story as he got it.
Yeah.
And I covered on my own show, I covered for about 7 days in a row. We did a series on the jinn.
Oh, boy.
And talked about this because there's a lot of information there. And it's very interesting. So David said, be very careful. You may have a jinn on your hands there. And there are things that have happened to me. First of all, just looking at time, I got a little bit of time, right? I will try not to drag this out too long, but that same week we had gone from Saqqara. We went back down to Luxor, where John lived, and their archaeological mission, by the way, is Gebel El Silsila, down about 100 miles south of Luxor on the Nile. Quarry site, 23 square miles of ancient quarries.
Wow.
Filled with inscriptions and temples and all kinds of things that they've put back on the map. So I've gone there a few times and worked with them and had fun just throwing my backpack and camera over my shoulder. They're digging over there, and I go to the other side of the river, and I go way back in the hills, and I'm looking at all the shrines and documenting them and so on.
Wonderful.
There was a time here where I don't know if this is jinn or if this is the spirit of the man that Chris Conway encountered. And he said, this man said he won't give you his name until he knows he can trust you, that he is connected to you because you think the way he thinks. And he says, this man was 3,000 years ago, he says, is what I'm getting. And there were other things that happened through the course of that week, that 2 weeks we were there on the boat going down the Nile, and all the things we were seeing that came up to help define this guy a little bit by little bit. But I was back here in the States, and John was here from Egypt, and a friend of ours, Rocky Stucci, and we were going to go investigate a house in South Minneapolis, Ghosts, that Rocky had been to before. And so we went there, and he said, maybe you guys want to pray if you want to your whatever you believe. And he says, for protection or whatever. And so I sat in this car, and this was back in 2014, I want to say. So it's only about a year after this happened in Egypt. And so I reached out and I said, whoever you are, I can't. Oh, and he did give his name, by the way, but Chris couldn't understand it or pronounce it. And there's other things behind that too. But so I reached out and I said, I can't remember your name, but you said that you would never leave Egypt, but that you would be connected to me only when I come to Egypt. I said, can I talk to you in my mind? Can you hear me? And all this while I'm doubting this, and I'm saying, if you can hear me, do you have the ability to extend protection of any kind from the spirit world? And I got to tell you, Peter, I'm sitting there, I've got my eyes closed in the car, and it was so heavy, not a negative heavy, just heady and
profound,
thick and profound. And I felt like you see in this statue, you can see the little child Neferuri, the princess, and Senenmut with his.
Would you bring that forward?
Sure, sure. Hang on. I'm going to take this out of my ear.
Yep,
it's heavy, but there you go.
Wow, that's
John carried this on an airplane from Egypt. So
that's a serious
let's see if
piece
I
of
can
marble.
Get us a little focus on this. Oh, it's harder to see, but I can show you. And I don't have my headset in, but here he is.
Well
this
done.
is Senenmut, and the small princess Neferuri, who was the daughter of Hatshepsut.
Yeah.
And he was her tutor. And tutors back then, 18th dynasty, they weren't school marms. They were generally highly honored noblemen or generals who had been victorious in battle, became tutors for the royal kids.
Yes.
So, sorry, I'm going to put this down.
Yes. Good idea.
And
earbuds back in.
John said he presented that to me at the 2013 Paradigm Symposium.
Yeah.
And he said, I hope you like that, brother. He says, I toted that through airports all from Luxor to Cairo to Frankfurt to New York to Minnesota.
You better like it.
Yeah, you better like it. And so this is Senenmut. And this was actually made from John. We had walked just 15 minutes from John's house in Luxor is the Valley of the Kings. Yes. And on the other side of the road from the Valley of the Kings is the old quarries of Hatshepsut. And so he went over, found a stone, just a bare stone in the quarries of Hatshepsut, brought it to a local artisan, and the artisan recreated this statue for me. And so that's where he came from.
Terrific.
So this is Egyptian stone right here. And so so this is the guy that, as you see this pose, by the way, is what I meant, with the child. And you've seen many statues like that where there's arms wrapped around a child or the chin is on top of the head. So I'm sitting in the car. We're going 75 miles an hour down the freeway, heading to this house. And I'm reaching out to this fellow. And I said, if you have the ability, do you even do that? Can you even hear me? And Peter, I swear to you, as I am a very, like I said, very pragmatic kind of guy.
Got it.
I felt arms around my shoulders from behind.
Yeah.
Arms and a chin. I felt this over holding my shoulders, and the feeling was enfolding. And I opened my eyes, and I was like, and we're still going down the freeway, and I'm like, I think I just had an incredibly profound spiritual experience sitting in a Ford Bronco going 75 miles an hour down the freeway, because I asked for protection from somebody I didn't even know was there or not. And it was very interesting. So it was almost like the guy who I read his accounts later about the jinn driving down the road as a passenger in a car down if you ever drive down a highway in Egypt and you're heading we were going from Luxor down to Gebel El Silsila for about 2 hours. It's highway straight, nothing there.
Wow.
Pass a truck and it's all desert as far as your eyes can see on both sides. And that's what he was riding in that. And he had this profound meeting like that. So if that's indeed what I encountered, I believe it is. Yeah. I can't prove it is.
Of course.
I can't prove it wasn't my mind making up psychological pictures in my head. I don't know for sure.
You don't have to know for sure. You had that experience and it was valid.
And there was one more experience that's connected to all of this. It was that same week I took that picture at the Hebsed Court at the Step Pyramid. We were down in Luxor, and we're at the funerary tomb of Hatshepsut. It's got the big ramps that go up, and it's that long, narrow, colonnaded temple with all the colonnades going across, and the ramps going up, and it's set in this crescent of the Theban mountains, the cliff face outside of Luxor in the Valley of the Nobles. Right on the other side of that ridge is the Valley of the Kings. Well, we're there at her temple, and John and I, and we went down into, if you take the main road, you're just riding up to it or walking up to it, and down in the coulees, down in the gutters, if you will, off of the main road, and down from the mountains or the cliff face. And there's the tomb of Senenmut. This guy is down there, one of his tombs. Now, we're standing in front of this, and it was the Polish Archaeological Mission that ran that, and they had it all locked down, and nobody was there for a few weeks, and so we didn't get to get inside. But we're standing outside and down in this gully, so to speak, and John and Maria wanted to go get coffee. Come on, brother, let's go get coffee. You've seen Senenmuti? He says, and he always mocked me because his guy was different than Senenmut. So fun teasing. And so they went up to get coffee. And I'm standing in front of this tomb of Senenmut, of this guy, who I think is the historical Moses for many, 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 many facts. I wrote a whole book about it. And so I'm standing there and I'm lighting a cigarette. It's around noon. And I say out loud, so, Senenmut, are you really Moses as we knew him? And then I said, Moses, are you Senenmut? Did you even exist the way we think you might have existed? And I went to light my cigarette, and it was like out of left field, something just, I dropped my cigarette in the sand, and I'm weeping. And I stopped and I said,
what's going on?
I said, what the F is that? Why am I crying?
That's right.
And I didn't even have any idea why I was crying. And it's just dripping into the sand, rolling off my face, profound tears. And I thought, this is odd. Now, something that had happened to me just a few weeks earlier, not even 2 weeks earlier, Philip Coppens had passed away. Now, Philip Coppens was on the show Ancient Aliens. Some of you might remember him. He wrote several books on conspiracy theory and so on. And he had written just written the foreword for my book on the reptilians. And I remember when he died, he was at the Paradigm Symposium in October, and by December, he was dead. He died of angiocarcinoma, cancer of the heart, very rare.
Oh.
And it just took him from October to December, and he was gone. And I remember I stood there when I got the news, and I started weeping.
Yeah.
And I thought, why am I weeping? I know Philip, and he's a friend, but it's not like close that I would be weeping like this. And it was almost uncontrollable. And I had a good friend of yours and mine, Micah Hanks, happened to be staying at Rainey's in my house. It was Christmas of that year.
Yeah.
And after 3-4 days of this, I couldn't escape it. It was every time it would hit I would work to not think about it. I would break into weeping. And my wife and Micah, they were actually going to call somebody. They thought something had snapped in me. Something's wrong with Scotty. Yeah. And so I get a phone call out of the blue 3 or 4 days after this, and it's David Weatherly. And he says, "How you doing, man?" I go, "Fine." "Cool. What's going on?" "Nothing new." I said, "I'm going to Egypt for the first time in a couple of weeks." And so we got to talk, and he says, "Well, you remember a while back I told you how I get messages? I'll hear a song or I'll read something, and he says, sometimes I hear an audible voice." And he says, "I was sitting here 10 minutes ago and I heard a voice in my office say, 'Call Scotty.'"
Yeah.
He says, "I got on my phone. That's why I'm here. What's going on? I'm going to ask you again." And so I started telling, I think I know why you're calling. I told him, and of course I can't do it without just totally breaking down.
Yeah.
And I said, "I don't know what this is." And he says, "I'm going to tell you something, Scotty. You're going to Egypt for the first time in about a week." He said, "All I can tell you is this. I don't have any answers for you, but I can tell you what happens to you in Egypt is going to change your life forever."
Mm.
And he says, "Go with an open mind." And okay. And it was after that, this thing passed. He didn't give me any advice. He didn't tell me what it was or try to define it. But then here I am at the tomb of Senenmut, and that happens. Now, when Philip and his wife were here for the Paradigm Symposium back in October of that year, previously, they said, "Well, we're going to Luxor we're going to work on a book together out there. And maybe we'll bump into you guys. We'll be there at the same time you're there, Scotty." Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, after I got back from Egypt, I was there for a month, and then I got home, and I ended up calling his widow, and I said, "I never told you," and I told her the story of Philip and the crying, and I said, "I don't know why that is." And I said, "It just hits me," and it didn't occur to me at the time. I said, "The same thing happened to me at the tomb of Senenmut." And she said, "Did you say Senenmut?" She said, "Remember when we told you we were going to go to Egypt?" He said, "Did I ever tell you that Philip claimed that he was a reincarnation of Senenmut?" I said, "I didn't know that. It's kind of extraordinary." She said, "What day did this happen to you?" And indulge me for just a second. This is my journal that I carry around in my cargo pocket when I travel. And I looked up the date because I wrote about it. Let me read you what I wrote that day. It's just a short entry.
Sure.
From that day. When I came up and I'd been crying at the tomb of Senenmut, John and Maria were over on the road talking to our governmental guide from the ministry. And John walks over, and I'm like, great, I'm crying. And I pull my hat down. I have my fedora on. And I pull that down, and he says, "Scotty," he says, "Look at me, brother." Yeah, that's it. It was that same trip. This is about 2 weeks later. And in that picture. And so he says, "Oh, you've been crying." And he puts his finger up and he wipes a tear off my cheek. And then he goes, "Look at me." And I look at him and he snaps a picture. He goes, "I've got Scotty crying for posterity." I said, "You're an ass." And we were laughing about it. Well, when I was up there, Maria came over and she says, Scotty, she says, here, in her beautiful Swedish accent, she says, when we're here, she said, I am a scholar, I am an academic. And she says, back home in Sweden, I'm a witch. She says, here what I want you to do. I want you to go back down to the tomb by yourself, ask for clarity. We're going to go get coffee. You come up when you're ready. So I walked back down and I sat in front of the tomb and I filled my cargo pockets full of sand from the entryway of Senenmut's tomb, which are all in little bottles and jars now. But I wrote this Tuesday, and here's my there's my journal, and I drew a little sketch of where I was sitting. I said Tuesday, February 4th, 2013, tomb TT353. This is one of Senenmut's tombs. I'm sitting in the sand outside the unused tomb of Senenmut. I stood in this little natural grotto and was overwhelmed with emotion, not sure precisely why. Tears, many tears. I'm not even sure if Senenmut is Moses, not even so sure that Moses even exists as I was taught. But someone is here. Someone grabbed my emotions, and I don't want to let them go. That's what I wrote that day. And so when I was talking to Philip's widow, she asked, what day did this happen? I read that February 4th of 2013. And she said, oh my God. She said, do you know what happened to me that day in my journal? She said, I was sitting with Philip's brother. We were leading a tour in Scotland that Philip was supposed to be on. And he took Philip's place. And he says, we're sitting in the hotel room having coffee. And there was Philip standing right in front of us. And he moved something on the table and vanished. And she said, that happened that same afternoon. She said, that's when she told me Philip had been believed he was a reincarnation of Senenmut. And they were writing a book about the relationship between Senenmut and the pharaoh Hatshepsut. They were lovers, the female pharaoh Hatshepsut. And anecdotally, and I'll stop with this, Senenmut's tomb, which is down in front of the long colonnaded temple of Hatshepsut's, you go down into the ground and it goes down into the tomb area. And he built this for himself, but never used it, so far as we know. On the other side of the cliff face in the Valley of the Kings, he built Hatshepsut's tomb. It goes down through the mountain and down into the ground. Those two tombs, if you saw a cutaway, they cut from the Valley of the Kings and from Hatshepsut, they cut and they meet. Just a wall of stone between them. They were lovers in life. And so it's an interesting thing about Senenmut. But he disappeared around age 40. Nobody knows whatever happened to him. There's nothing written about him. All of his images are destroyed along with Hatshepsut's when Thutmose III comes to the throne. Yeah. He leaves off of it a little bit. And then his son, 40 years later, when Thutmose III is in his 80s now, his son becomes co-regent at Amenhotep II, and he eradicates every last image of Hatshepsut and eradicates every last image of Senenmut. They found 9 statues of Senenmut buried in a pit in Luxor just in the last 50 years. And
talk about historical revisionism in the most literal sense possible.
Yes, erasure. And this ties into, of course, my whole theory that 40 years after the disappearance of Senenmut, he comes back. He's Moses. He comes back, leads the people out, and the pharaoh, Amenhotep II, eradicates every last vestige of this man from the face of the earth, he thinks. And I have reason to believe, by the way, that it wasn't even Pharaoh that Moses met with. I'll just give you this one for free. This is my own theory. I didn't include this in the book, but it says that in the scriptural account, after the slaves leave, the Exodus starts, Moses is gone with all the slaves. It says, and Pharaoh walks in and says, where are my slaves? as if he had no idea what had happened. And then he mounts his army, who was already just unmounting from a campaign. He'd been gone on campaign. Now, what did the Grand Vizier do in Egypt? Grand Vizier was called Pharaoh in the place of Pharaoh. I believe that Moses was encountering Rechmir, the Grand Vizier, who would have been a contemporary of his when they were in the school of the nobles as kids. Grew up with him. Senenmut becomes the Grand Vizier under Hatshepsut instead of Rechmir. After he disappears, Hatshepsut dies. And what happens? Rechmir becomes Tutmosis III's Grand Vizier, then his sons, Amenhotep II. For a few years, he's in his 80s now. And so I believe that the Pharaoh of the Exodus was Amenhotep II, but he wasn't there for anything that led up to the leaving of the slaves from Egypt. And I believe that was probably in different forms than we've been led to believe too. But interesting story, all of this. And I think, and I got a lot of spiritual stuff wrapped around this guy. So.
You know, Scotty, while you're speaking, and I'm sure in looking through the comments of some of our viewers and listeners, my mind is going to different places. There was a time I was very passionately pursuing a career in New York City as a gallery artist.
Yes.
I lived, ate, and breathed the New York City art world. It was all that was important to me. And at the same time, years before I had any conscious interest or pursuit of the subject of UFOs, I was fascinated by ancient cultures, ancient mysteries, up until a certain point when I heard the term a channel. I thought, right, roll your eyes up in the back of your head, talk in a funny voice, make believe you're a 50,000-year-old disembodied spirit,
right,
and make the check out in my name, please. Until I was introduced to the work of Edgar Cayce,
yes,
who was a very legitimate American psychic. And that got me more interested in that line between what is, what can be, and the other side of the mirror, so to say. For a number of reasons, in the early 1970s, I became very interested in the pyramids. And in 71, a book was published that I picked up a copy of a few years later, Secrets of the Great Pyramids by Peter Tompkins.
I've got that book, I believe.
A Bible. It was a Bible to me for many years as far as information on the Great Pyramids. It led me to a childhood interest in Tutankhamun.
Yes.
For many people, the best known of the Egyptian pharaohs, although in the great historical march of early, middle, and late kingdom, a so-called minor pharaoh. Books like The Sphinx and the Megaliths, esoteric books published in England. But then I got my hands on The Tomb of Tutankhamun, Howard Carter. And this flashed me right back to my childhood love of The Mummy and of the mysteries and the adventure and the excitement. And at this point, I'm going to hijack our conversation a bit to take us back to a profound moment in the history of archaeology, and one that had a tremendous impact on popular culture and in the United States and the United Kingdom for quite a number of years. I love Greece. And when you were talking about that feeling of seeing the wear on the steps and thinking, Moses walked here. I visited Greece 3 times. I hope I go back another 10. I visited the Parthenon half a dozen times in my life. And I remember on that first visit, walking up those steps, up that hill, and seeing how worn they were from some thousands of years of travelers, pilgrims, VIPs, the unknown, and thinking of all of the great and unknown people whose steps I was following in, and having a number of experiences in Greece. And the fact is, I've traveled in more than 25 countries, a number of which none of us will ever go to or go back to at this point. I've roamed all over, through a good part of Afghanistan on my own twice, Iran, Nepal, Pakistan. And that feeling of kind of walking through a portal or feeling that moment of is this my imagination? Is this a window area? Ultimately, it really doesn't matter. I'm having an experience here, and I'm just going to let it happen. In 1922, two rather remarkable, fascinating, eccentric Englishmen, very different characters, one an archaeologist, one an aristocrat, went into a partnership. It happened actually before 1922, but it culminated them. One was Howard Carter, the archaeologist, and the other was Lord Carnarvon. And as I mentioned to you before we went on the air, Carnarvon, fascinated by ancient Egypt, wanted in on the subject and funded a number of expeditions of Carter to make a find. For fans like us of Downton Abbey, that wonderful, fabulous, over-the-top British soap opera in the best sense of the word, that was Carnarvon's home. That is the ancestral home of this man and plays into this story. Anyway, I don't know if there's a more emblematic or famous picture or one more highly charged in the whole history of photography as it impacts on Egyptology. It's this photo.
Yes. The unbroken seal.
That's it. The unbroken seal and the curse. Death shall come on swift wings to he who disturbs the peace of the king. It was Carter who made this find, partly by intuition, partly in desperation, because Carnarvon had made it clear that the funding was running out. And at a certain point, one of the diggers has cleared an area, and there is a doorway, and this is the seal. This is the seal on the edge of the seal. And with that, we're going to spend about 2.5 minutes briefly and just take a look at a piece that, not the History Channel, but a related piece that I think I'm onto. I think it's here.
Hello and welcome to History Pod. On the 26th of November 1922, Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon entered the tomb of Tutankhamun in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. Having taken part in his first Egyptian excavation in 1891, Carter secured financial assistance from Lord Carnarvon to lead his own expedition to the Valley of the Kings in 1907. 5 years later, the American lawyer and excavator Theodore M. Davis declared in a book his conviction that the valley contained no more treasures. Despite this dour assessment, Carter continued to search for the tomb until the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. Carter resumed digging again after the war, but he continued to make few finds. The situation was indeed so bleak that at the start of the 1922 season, Carnarvon warned him that he would only provide one more season of funding. Having decided to focus on an area of the valley containing a series of huts that had been used in previous digs, Carter's crew cleared the debris until they hit bedrock. On the 4th of November, they found a flight of steps that led to a doorway stamped with indistinct oval seals called cartouches. Carter ordered the stairway be refilled and waited for Carnarvon to make his way to Egypt. On the 26th of November, with access to the tomb cleared again of debris, Carter made a tiny hole in a doorway and used the light of a candle to peer inside. Carnarvon asked if he could see anything, and Carter replied with the famous words, "Yes, wonderful things." Although Tutankhamun was one of the minor pharaohs, the discovery of his tomb is significant for it being the most complete example of a royal Egyptian tomb ever uncovered.
So, really quite a wonderful brief introduction to this subject. And as it turned out, however one wants to interpret it, the curse on the seal came to pass. Can you enlighten our friends in the audience about what happened?
Sure. I don't know all the details of this. However, I've got something spinning on my screen here. There it goes. Sorry, it was distracting me for a second. And I do know that there were several of the members of this party and expedition that came down ill with something. Lord Carnarvon himself died. He got deathly ill from, of all things, a mosquito bite that he got in Egypt. And he ends up dying. And I think this was one of the first big, you know how these things go. You hear the legends of the curses on Egyptian tombs and the curse of the mummy.
Yes.
And so on. And this of course, seemed to bolster those legends. And
well, it's so gripped the public imagination. And here are just some stock shots. Obviously, these are later ones where it's lit to just give us a bit of a sense of what these two men basically stumbled into.
And you are aware of the new tomb they created. I think they used the LiDAR scanning of some kind. I don't know exactly what they used, but they completely reconstructed King Tut's tomb.
Yes.
In 3D, and it's in a museum. It's in the Cairo Museum now, I think. And so you can actually go walk through it, every last minute little detail.
It's absolutely wonderful. What you think about the destruction, the hatred, the madness in the world at any given time. Right now, being a perfect example, and how something from the past can capture the imagination, the passion, the unification of human thinking, bring people together who in another forum would be at each other's throats, either politically or historically or in terms of theology. And yet this wonderful reality is something that, unless you have a heart of stone, is deeply fascinating. I have a dear friend, a wonderful playwright, an actor, a great theater scholar, Marty Martin, who lives in Texas now, or back in Texas now, many years in theater world in New York, who, among other things, has put together the finest set of reproductions of all of these extraordinary objects from Tut's tomb that are basically constantly touring the world in one point or another. Some of us were lucky enough to see, if we haven't been to the Cairo Museum, some of these wonderful artifacts. I saw them many years ago in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And if you ever have an opportunity to see the real thing or the wonderful reproduction show that for many folks is going to be the closest they can get that Marty organizes, do not pass it up.
We have the big King Tut's exhibition. I read it rather like the Van Gogh immersive thing that's coming to Minneapolis in the next few months. I want to see that. So
another development has been kind of spun off of cutting edge forensic developments in terms of criminal investigation, where its original use or development was around reconstructing the likeness of an individual who had been murdered. And in many cases, there's no way to figure out what they looked like. But the teams of scientists and investigators, sculptors have done just that. And it has blown back wonderfully into the world of Egyptology and ancient Greece and ancient Rome. We now have a fairly good idea of what quite a number of the Roman emperors looked like.
Yes.
And times when in Greece, to see the sculpture that scholars say most perfectly captures that particular personage, and then see the scientific reproduction and realize, my gosh, this is what they really looked like, which for a lot of us is thrilling.
Yes.
This also is a wonderful example through careful measurements, understanding of how, physical material ages, to be able to give us this close of an idea, and backed up here too, and confirmed in this particular sculpture, which I find incredibly engaging. Part of my point here was in 1922, this story explodes all over the Western world, well, the Eastern world too, but particularly in the United Kingdom, because it was a British team in a sense in the old imperialist days. And of course, treasure dragged off.
Yes.
Something that the karma is being leveled out to a degree in this period of time. In fact, it sounds like we are now one step closer to the British Museum restoring the Elgin marbles to Greece. The British Museum has, of course, been protecting them since about 1807.
Protecting them, yes.
From the Turks, and doing a wonderful job of it. I don't believe that the Turk have gotten their hands on them, but please give us a effing break. And one of the things that, in terms of popular culture, that fascinated and actually knocked me out, and we see something similar in terms of American and British fascination with ancient Greece emerging in no uncertain terms in the 1820s and then full-blown in the 1830s, where an entire revival of Greek architecture and Greek fashion, especially among women, became the norm in America, in society, and in England as well. But what happened after this tremendous discovery and people becoming quite fascinated by ancient Egypt, Egyptology, these gorgeous artifacts, was it blew back into popular culture in architecture, in fashion, in ornament, in a way that we had never seen before in modern history. And I thought it would be fun to just quickly review this. Well, here we are.
There I am.
And actually, there's one other wonderful photo I want to show before we go on. There we are.
Oh, yes. It's John Ward and me. Yes. John Ward is an archaeologist. He's a British archaeologist, and his wife, Maria Nilsson, Dr. Maria Nilsson, is the head of their archaeological mission and at Gebel El Silsila. That's my living room, by the way.
Wonderful. Wonderful. It does look like a scene out of Indiana Jones, I might say.
Yes.
Part of the great fun of spending time with you guys in Minnesota was getting to hang out with John, who, wow, what a great character, in capital letters with a lot of wiggly lines coming off of them. Just so engaging and so knowledgeable and so personable. A really wonderful memory of spending that time with him. This is a commercial building in downtown Los Angeles, built in the 1920s. And then we go into the world of women's fashion. And
there it is.
It just exploded in America and in Great Britain. These were the way,
that looked in the 20s.
Yep, you better believe it.
Down to the haircuts.
Totally. And then household ornamentation, things as common as doorstops, mirror frames, tables, and then jewelry, of course.
And they also if maybe you're gonna, I hope I'm not jumping the gun, didn't they have a lot of rich folk would have mummy unwrapping parties in the 20s? They would acquire a mummy from Egypt, and they'd say,
I don't have pictures.
James brought us a mummy. We're going to send out invites. We're going to have drinks and unwrap the mummy tonight.
It's yes, like a gender reveal party.
Yes, yes.
But actually, the last two images I have here, which I find actually jaw-dropping in a way, where ruling class people with the means, decided, well, let's not just have a regular old Victorian mausoleum for the remains of the family. Let's go with something more Egyptian.
There you go. Very nice. That actually looks like the Red Chapel of Hatshepsut at Karnak.
I'm sure the architect was well aware of it and delighted in sharing it with the future inhabitants.
Yes.
But I thought, how interesting that something so captured the public imagination in terms of something that had been seen up until that moment by most regular folks as something dry and boring, studying ancient cultures, archaeology. And then archaeology became incredibly romantic pursuit. And I think there was a later revival in the early 80s because of a certain American film, which everybody fell in love with. And, Indiana Jones became a mainstay of popular culture.
Yes. And there are not many archaeologists out there that do not have a place in their heart and mind and respect for Indiana Jones. I'll tell you that.
That's a good thing. I want people to be aware, you as a writer have been very prolific, and because you are an autodidact, you have a mind that has reached out into quite a number of areas of study and made yourself educated on them, and also as an artist. And I see you as an artist and an illustrator. There was a time when I was coming up through art school in the arts where if you made your living illustrating books or magazines or something, you were looked down on by the fine arts community. We now have a more enlightened attitude. I mean, for God's sakes, people are looking down on the work of Norman Mailer and Howard Fast. Yes. These are great American artists who made their living as illustrators. Mm-hmm. And I wanted people to be aware of some of your books. And before we go on, people can get your stuff on Amazon, but is there a dedicated website to learn more about you and order books or like that?
I have actually two websites. I have my personal website, just my full name, ScottAllenRoberts.com. And Alan, I always have to spell it because there's a million ways to spell Alan. ALAN. So ScottAllenRoberts.com. You can see links to all my stuff there. I've also got a little website that I put up with my most recent book, which was an illustrated book that I also wrote. That's only 8,000 words. It's a short book, but it's the tale of Will Byrd, who was a Canadian Black Watch soldier in World War I who found an old Roman sword in the mud and clay at Amiens, France, after the bombing. And they found it, went dated back. There it is right there. There's the cover. Dated back to Caesar's Gallic Wars. And so I juxtaposed two stories, the story of Will Byrd, the true story, and then nobody knew to whom the sword belonged. As a matter of fact, I've got the book right here that you can see the cover beautiful. On that. And I did all the illustrations in this book, but there's we didn't know to whom the sword ever belonged, and so I had to create a fictional character for the sword. And one Marius Abruzzo, I called him, and his two brothers who fought for Julius. Here's how just some of the illustrations in the book look. That's the final illustration in the book. Ooh. I don't want to give the story away, but that's obviously Spirit World stuff right there. But so that's how the book looks. Easy read, 8,000 words. You could read this in a half an hour.
Well, let's take a look at some of your books here first.
All right. Secret History of the Reptilians. That was that's the one that Philip Coppens wrote the forward for.
Yeah.
And this was the follow-up to the first book I did for New Page Books.
Again, the pervasive presence of the serpent in human history, religion, and ancient myths. A creature, I think, that got a lot of bad press in the Bible. And as a result, a lot of people are frightened of or don't like snakes. I think they're quite wonderful. And it's so interesting the way that theology impacts on our perception of just a natural creature that's just doing what it does, but all of a sudden it has certain values or stories attached to it that.
I contributed to this book. It was an anthology. Several people you would know wrote in this book. Eric von Daniken, Philip Coppens, Micah Hanks is in this one.
Great.
And I wrote about the other people, my chapter, meaning the people that Cain would have encountered when he left Eden. Who were these people? So this was another one I did an anthology piece for.
Yeah, some great contributors here. Dr. Robert Schock, the late, great Jim Mars, my friend Nick Redfern. So many good contributors. Micah, again, Laird Scranton, who, of course, I met through you, and who is a fellow New York Stater like me. And
there's John Ward's in my book, and The Exodus Reality. And John and I had two different theories on who we thought the historical Moses actually was. And we wined and dined our publisher, Michael Pye, at New Page Books, which is now part of Red Wheel Weiser, Hampton Roads. And he said, okay, you can write this book. And I just have to show your listeners this. This is the final book. What Michael gave us in this book, there it is, The Exodus Reality. And there's John and I and our friend the Sphinx in the background. But what he gave us in this book was 2 color sections. It's got about 100 black and white photos in it, but there's these 2 sections of color that I've divided up for all of our travels over there and everything that we did and all the things we saw that were in relation to up close. That kind of gives you an idea in relation to what was going on there. So
looks like one to definitely add
it's a
to
fun
the
picture book.
Believe it or not, we have come to the end of our time, Scotty.
Oh my.
I can't tell you how much I have enjoyed our time together. And at some point, I hope you be interested in maybe coming back and joining us again for more reflections on the ancient world and where we stand.
I would love to. Thanks for letting me talk so much. It's I rarely have anybody ask me about my young life. So
I'm delighted. It's one of the things we try to specialize in here. How do people in public life we admire become the people they are? Next week, I'm going to have a special show. We are coming into the actual 75th anniversary of the beginning of our modern age of UFOs. And it began kind of bookended by 2 extraordinarily important, truly historic events. The Kenneth Arnold sightings of June 24th, 1947, and a scant week later, if that, the crash of something on the plains of St. Augustine, well outside of a small town at that time called Roswell, New Mexico. Join us next week when we will have Chanel Shantz, the granddaughter of Kenneth Arnold, and Jesse Marcel III, the grandson of Major Jesse Marcel, as well as 1 or 2 other guests. I hope you'll be with us. Stay well, stand up for what you believe in, and be kind to each other. See you next week.